World War IV burned most of Earth's population to ash and left the planet a barren wasteland, but war always finds a way. In this dark, futuristic world of machine and Krieger, the world and the moon is fought over once more by mercenary forces and government soldiers that seek to control them. Lunar mercenary troops attacked the Totenkopf Defense Forces on January 28, 86, resulting in mass Totenkopf losses of destroyed and abandoned materials. Taking advantage of this situation, mercenary troops quickly worked to reclaim and restore equipment to later be used against their former owners.
And what we have here is a lunar tactical reconnaissance craft, the LUM-168, developed under the codename Camel. This is the late model version that features increased armor at the cockpit and fuselage connection, and this was used to assault the Strahl Army lunar weapons arsenal in the Mercenary Army's Great Offensive Operation of September 28, 86. I guess the first thing that surprised me just out of the box was, well, the box itself. It's a large box, and opening the box, well, it's a large kit. Larger than I was expecting, but that's okay. In terms of construction and the instructions themselves, the instructions are clear, and the build goes together actually fairly quickly. It tends to be one of these pressure fit sort of models similar to the Bandai kits, and this allows for a lot of articulation here, so that's a really cool, fun feature as well. The instructions, of course, began with the legs. Those are complete. Now I'm starting to work my way up through the body and put everything together here. This happens to be these parts right here, this round disc, that is part of that up-armored shell that's part of the fuselage connection. I paint this out, not quite knowing exactly what's going to be shown or not shown later on. Turns out all this work will never, ever be seen again. But you know what? That's okay. It's a good warm-up to get ready for the rest of the project. The next little fun feature is the rocket thruster on the underside of the Luna Camel here, and that allows the vehicle to be able to jump across or fly across, if you will, crevices and deep ravines that are on the lunar landscape. And that's it for the fancy features. Now it's time to put everything together. The two halves of the body simply kind of clamshell or clamp together over these parts. It doesn't take glue necessarily, but I did glue these parts, and even with that, I do have a pretty significant seam line running both on the top and the bottom. So I'm going to fill that up with some Mr. Surfacer 500, sand that back, and keep moving on here. And so now it's time to veer off the beaten track and make it a little bit more complicated than it needs to be. I decided I wanted to make this Luna a little bit more, I don't know, industrial looking here. So I'm going to add some rivets or bolt head or bolt holes throughout this. So I'm making just a quick template on some cardstock here. This allows me to kind of warp it around some of these contours and just marking off little marks here about every half a centimeter all along all these different seam lines here. And then you guessed it, on each of these, on both sides of the seam line, I'm just going to go ahead and drill out some little holes. I'm hoping this gives it a little bit more personality, something to kind of weather around as well. Some little interesting visual interest cues here. Okay, here we are up at the cockpit, and this happens to be one of the more detailed parts of the model. There is a lot going on within the side of this cockpit. So I've painted it out, and there's all sorts of little buttons and gadgets and levers that I can paint out as well, add some little details. And then there's all this piping and plumbing that you could add that come with the kit. And I've also taken the liberty of just cutting off some little bits and pieces of wire and adding some extra little electrical cables here and there just to kind of busy it up and make it a little bit more interesting, because I just can't leave well enough alone from time to time. As I neared completion of the cockpit, I really wanted to see if this pilot would actually fit in there, and he does. He has to kind of slide in, slide out. I did have to change the position on his arms a little bit to make sure he reached the handles of those levers, and that left a few gaps that needed filling. And now it's time to paint our pilot. Well, he's going to have this nice bright orange jumpsuit, so I give him a primer color layer of white, and over that we'll paint him in all various shades of oranges and such in order to bring out some of these details. A special thank you to all my amazing Patreon members for your incredible support. Your contributions help me continue to create content for this channel. If you're not already a member, I invite you to join our Patreon community. As a member, you'll gain access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content, early releases, and more. I hope you'll consider joining Patreon and supporting this channel. Thank you very much. Well, now that we have our model basically put together, I want to take it apart again because we still have some more work to do on it, and we also need to prepare for painting. So especially on the legs here, there are, because it's a pressure fit sort of a construction process here, there are a lot of gaps or seams. I shouldn't say a lot, but there are seams on all these different parts here. I could spend for the next 4 or 5 days filling and sanding and filling and sanding, but instead, let's just camouflage them. So I'm going to take little bits and pieces of plastic strip and just add those over the top of these seam lines. And it'll just add a little extra dimension. And then if you look at the model, of course, it's made from basically greeblies from your spare parts box. So I've pulled out some extra greeblies and added just a few extra details, the hatch on the rear of the model, and a few extra hinges and things here and there, just to, again, personalize it a bit, because I just can't leave well enough alone. And now it's time to start painting the model itself. So the base color overall on all the parts is white gray. It's a real color. And then in terms of the overall paint scheme, boy, I spent a lot of time coming up with ideas on this. In the end, I took kind of suggestions from the box and traditional Machine & Krieger looks and appearances. Somewhat traditional here, but I'm going to riff off a little bit. I'm not following any particular scheme that was suggested, kind of changing some colors here and there as well. And especially when we get to markings later on, I'm going to really kind of move off the range a bit with those. Okie dokie, well, we've got the camouflage basically in place, and yes, I'm going to continue to kind of tweak on that, change some things here and there as we move along, but I really want to get started on these different identification stripes here. My thought here is I want some bright color to go along with this, and you know, the lunar landscape is dark and there might be blowing dust here and there, and we want to be able to identify the good guys from the bad guys. So I'm going to have these kind of high visibility stripes here and there, and they also make for some nice pops of color. Not really a big plan of how or where these are all going to go. I just kind of keep working on them, and let's add a little stripe here, a little area there, and you know, just enough to give it some personality. And then next up we have our decal sheet, or our decals, and this is quite the comprehensive selection here. There's, well, enough to make quite a few different variants of the Luna Camel that are included in the color profiles within the box, but you can kind of pick and choose here as well. At least I did, because I'm not really following the instructions here, obviously. So some of these go exactly where they're supposed to go. Other ones I kind of improvise. For instance, these letter K's on the top, well, they're not supposed to be there. It's supposed to be on the sides. And then on the model, there's this tube at the top. I don't know what it's supposed to be. I'm gonna guess it's maybe some sort of condensed gases or something like that to run this machine. I took a cue from, say, the Apollo 11 lunar landing crafts where they had tinfoil or foil reflector all over it. So I've got some really old bare metal foil here. As you can see, it's basically fused with the backing paper, but I pull off small strips, and I'm going to be using that to cover that tube on top. And I guess that would complete what would be the first half of this video. So that's the construction, and we have all the base painting done, and now we can start moving over to the weathering and all the alterations. I'm going to change a few things up here and there, but here we go. Let's start weathering. Okay, in terms of weathering, let me be honest here. This is a daunting model. This size alone makes it somewhat challenging here. And so I needed to kind of figure out, or wanted to try to figure out, what's the best approach to kind of tackle this in terms of, because of the size and methodology and such. So I decided what I would do, just kind of in a basic, plan here, is I would start from the bottom up, work with the feet and the legs, and work my way up to the body and see how things looked. I've decided to use sponge chipping method here for a lot of those primary chips because it was quick and they can be in scale at this size. And then what I would do is just kind of make a round from the bottom up, take a look at it, see what needs to be done, address a few issues, and just kind of keep working through that process here. Did that both for this first part of the layering, or the weathering here, where I'm using the acrylic paints just to paint out some chips and scratches and blemishes and things like that. You can see I'm highlighting some of those bolt holes and panel lines that we put in earlier. So now I have all my, my first layer of weathering there. I have my chips, my scratches, my scuffs, all done with the acrylic paints. Now I'm going to come back in with another round or another layer of weathering. And these, once again, yes, it's the oil paints. And I'm going to start working with the oil paints again to add what will be more of, say, the environmental effects, the lunar dust, if you will, the dirt and the grime. Also, kind of changing or nuancing some of those colors, so adding some blues and grays here and there just to bring out some different features or different colors within those, say, the camouflage pattern in of itself. My plan of attack here is basically the same as the first round. I'm going to start with the bottom, so the feet and the legs, and work my way up. I also want it to be, or want it to feel, or visually feel bottom heavy, so that meaning, at least in my mind, that there'll be much more weathering, heavier weathering along the feet, along the legs and things like that than will be over the top of the model. Once I get about 3 times through with the oil paints here, yes, it was kind of a long process. I thought, well, I could add a little more interest here and there to that camouflage. So I'll do a little bit of speckling. This is just highly thinned oil paints just on the brush. Just kind of tap it with my finger, make a little droplets go here and there. Those are little whites and blue colors. And then I let those set for just, 3-5 minutes or something like that. And anything that doesn't quite blend in or looks out of place, I can just kind of wipe them away or blend them back with the brush later on here. And then next up we have our canopy here. This is that really nice bubble canopy that fits over the front of the cockpit, and it's got this really nice smoke color to it as well. This is really, really nice, really well done, no blemishes at all. I decided this will be a nice place to add one more pop of color here, so I'm going to mask that off, and we're going to make a nice trim here of the bright orange. First lay down some white color here because, as we all know, orange is a tough color to paint, so you want a nice white background as your base layer to paint over the top of. And then, of course, that moment of truth. Oh, fingers crossed. And it's looking good. Great. Okay, cool. I can actually mask things. I can, maybe I'll do an airplane at some point in time now, because I finally got this figured out. And then just because, I couldn't leave well enough alone, I started looking at some of those identification panels that we painted earlier, and I thought, God, they just seem a little bit nondescript. I don't know, not quite as interesting as I hoped they would be. So I thought, well, let's go ahead and add some gray to this, and we'll break those up a bit and change some of the colors. So I've added some little stripes of gray, added some hash marks of gray. This top propeller generally at first was painted in the camouflage colors, but I thought, no, we'll gray that out as well. I'll add some little metallic chips there. I guess this is a propeller, and then go from there. But this is the part where I start just adding some of those finer details and bringing some life to it all. And then speaking of which, I thought these bottom panels here, well, they could use some kind of eye-catching definition. So why not some oil leaks here and there? So underneath this arm, this will be a good place, right? Just start adding some oil drips and leaks that come across this panel. And in case you're wondering, this is a really easy way to do it. These are, of course, oil paints. I'll use smoke, which is one of the colors, so dark gray color, and then ochre. And those two colors together especially really make some nice, and I'll kind of change the mix up a bit, but those really make a nice oil stain type color. And just kind of tap those on, change the colors a little bit here and there, draw them down for the longer streaks, and you have it. And now for a nice musical interlude. Not really. Actually, I decided I was going to go ahead and restring one of my acoustic guitars. And no, I'm not going to use my brand new strings for this, but I am going to try to use maybe some of my old strings. So I've cut some lengths here, and these are wound strings, so they have a really nice texture to it. And I think I'm just going to replace some of these different cables and different tubes and pipes and things on these arms with some different type of material here, just to try to make it, I know, I'm personalizing it one more time, trying to make it a little bit more interesting here. So first step is to put those in. These are bronze, so they'll darken up in the metal fluid here, and then I'll be able to attach them to the model. When we get to this stage of construction, we are really coming down to the final stretch here. Once we start adding all these cables and the tubes and the plumbing and all these things to the model, then we attach the legs for one final time. And that's basically it in terms of following the instructions. I've decided to add just, one more thing here. There is a radial antenna to the rear of the model here. I decided to add a few more. This is a reconnaissance vehicle, so I thought, a few more radio antennas couldn't hurt, could it? So just using some nice stiff wire guitar strings and drilled some holes in here, and we'll just add some extra aerials here. And that really does bring us to the conclusion of this project. This is my very first Machine & Krieger build, my first project with Machine & Krieger, this Luna Camel. I have really enjoyed this, and I know I say that with all my projects, but boy, this one has been a lot of fun. This will certainly not be my last. And now with that, we're going to put a lid on this project. Yeah, it's kind of bittersweet, eh? So over the top, you'll see a bunch of final photographs of this project. I hope you enjoy those. If you do enjoy this channel and what we do here at Propaganda, please hit that like and subscribe button. Those buttons really do help the YouTube guys know that I'm alive and kicking. If you want to see more content from Propaganda, I do have the Patreon page. I'd love to see you over there as well. Finally, one last thank you. Thank you for watching, and until the next time, everyone, Happy modeling.